I'm surprised that you're getting people that are coming to you who identify with narcissism just because from what I understood is that the self-reflection aspect is very limited and just like you're saying the defenses come up. So just
Yes.
from our experience we've seen such a resistance to any kind of treatment or even acknowledgement of that.
Yeah.
How are you getting them to come
Yeah.
to you and say that?
Well, and I mean, overall, it's because what happens is these defenses, um, they're very precarious, because they distort reality so much. So what that means is reality penetrates. So reality eventually penetrates and they crash. And that's the whole collapse of the grandiose structure that I mentioned earlier that holds them together. So this could range from anywhere from a significant person in their life, like a loved one, a spouse, telling them, because so many people are getting more educated about narcissism today. And maybe this isn't the best way to do it, but they tell them you're a narcissist and I'm not going to tolerate this anymore and you need to get some help or I'm leaving. And they don't want to lose their not all of them want to lose their relationship. So they puncture their fantasy, the grandiose fantasy gets punctured. And this happens all the time. Um, so maybe there is a failure at work, right? Or maybe, I get parents who come to me where their children want to go no contact now because they realize that a parent is a narcissist, but they don't want to lose their child. I could keep going, but the way that, in short, the answer is the grandiose structure, the illusion can only hold up for so long. Reality eventually gets in the way, and then it depends what you want to do once the reality punctures it. And like to your point, many people probably want to just reinstate the illusion, double down. But there are other people out there who get confronted with reality and they don't want to lose something. And that's where they may turn, to get more serious treatment. And by the way, many of them have been in and out of treatment for many years unsuccessfully. So I think they know and at some level that there is inherently a problem inside of them.
I don't know, but their defense structure is so intact that sometimes it just seems like nothing's going to get through. They'll just move on to a new supply where they can create another or maintain the reality that they're trying to create.
Yeah. And sometimes, and obviously I don't see those cases because they
Hmm.
don't make it to me. So I can't speak to all the ones that don't make it to me, but
Yeah.
the ones that do don't want it because maybe they've already moved on, right, Deborah? Maybe
Hmm.
this is their third marriage, which, by the way, I'm not making that up. This is not uncommon. And they're like, I don't want to start over again. I'm already divorced twice. My kids hate me. I need to work on this, or, I'm getting older and I can't just keep doing this.
Hmm. It almost
Yeah.
sounds like they have to bottom out, almost like an addict. And in a way,
Mm.
it is similar to an addiction. It sounds like they're trying to maintain this fantasy world. That's their addiction.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense because what would be the motive if they're still flying high and getting the supplies, there's no conflict. Conflict is so important.
Hmm.
People think conflict's a problem, but if when not overwhelmed by it, it could sort of motivate you to move forward in life. So yeah, if you bottom out and there's a big enough conflict,
Hmm.
and then you realize this is a pattern in my life that just keeps repeating. Maybe it's not my third wife. Maybe it's me.
Right, right. So many people just struggle to differentiate between just narcissistic traits and full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. How do you explain that spectrum?
Yeah, so I think I'm saying this sort of in a general way, not like diagnostically, but we can
Mhm.
argue that many of us have these kind of narcissistic traits. We all have moments where we feel very proud and good of ourselves, good about ourselves, that we like to talk about an accomplishment that we had. Maybe we're somewhat perfectionistic at work. Maybe we don't always hear other people's opinions. So these are some of the narcissistic traits. But yes, that's very different than the personality disorder. And the main distinguishing feature, there are a few of them, but one of them is almost a complete inability to take somebody else's perspective into consideration. So in other words, other people don't really exist in their life, like with their own mind, their own opinion on things, with their own life. So that's one of the distinguishing characteristics is that they do not tolerate separateness very well. And at work, this could be okay, especially if they're in a management position or at a very high, because people sort of look up and have to follow what they say, right? Because if they're in a leadership position and they're the boss, although this leads to other problems, which we don't need to get into, but the problems typically show up in intimacy, in relationships, because many people, when they get in a relationship, they want to feel like they actually exist, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. So they tend to get into some problems there. And that's when you start to see more of the full blown or more like meeting the diagnostic criteria. for NPD is one minute they feel good, they have everything in control, and the next minute when someone disagrees or has a different opinion, they feel completely deflated. So there are a lot of oscillations. And that goes back when you said, I'm surprised that people would come in for treatment. But that's the whole grandiose structure because it's constantly up and down. It's very rare that it's consistently up for years or decades at a time because reality just gets in the way. So
Does it
much
sort of look like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde presentation?
it could. It probably, I'm not sure how quickly that oscillates with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde,
Mhm.
because depending on how much that oscillates or how quickly, then you get into more of what we call borderline personality disorder. And the main distinguishing factor is the borderline doesn't have that grandiose structure that I keep mentioning. That structure, that grandiosity really holds them together so they can live in actually a more stable life. And you know this, they appear. Sometimes they can even appear. And they are high functioning in many different ways, right? Again, except for when it comes to intimacy. But yes, it does oscillate like that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but typically when they are what? Slighted and they don't get the supplies. And that's when you see the other side, the more, well, I was going to say the more vulnerable side begin to emerge, which you may see. They may become more clingy and needy and demanding, right? But to get the supplies, depending on what we call like different clusters of narcissism, which just means there are different presentations of it, they all have sort of a different mode of repair. They can repair their self-esteem in different ways. So some of them could be very clingy and needy and get the supplies that way. We're all the way on the other end of the continuum. Some can become quite what? Destructive, aggressive, hostile, demanding, controlling, manipulative. So you see different presentations of how they try to reconstitute their self-esteem and sense of self.
Can you talk about the different clusters of narcissism?
Oh boy, we would be here all day. I mean, again, if you watch any social media, I think they're probably up to like 20 of them now. I'm exaggerating a little bit. But in
Right.
my mind, if we just sort of level them out,
Mhm.
I would just look at it as on a continuum of like the more vulnerable, needy, clingy type. These are the people who may still live at home or, like with their parents, they live in the basement even though they're adults and they're not really financially independent. These are like the spouses who completely rely on their other, to take care of everything, cooking, cleaning, ordering, buying their clothes. So that's sort of one end. In the middle would be, and you know this, the covert narcissist who get their supplies in a very different way, which is like passive aggressiveness. They're always above everybody. They always know what's right. They're very good at inducing guilt. And then all the way on the other end, closer to psychopathy is the malignant narcissist, which they don't come into, and that might be to your point earlier, Deborah. You don't see them as frequently in treatment, right? Because these are people who have more of the antisocial personality traits. That's more of the aggressiveness and destructiveness that I alluded to before. So if there was a continuum or different, I'm saying different types of narcissism or clusters, I would say it goes like vulnerable, covert somewhere in the middle, and then very destructive, the malignant narcissist.
Okay, that's a good, differentiation. And
Does
then
it line up with like, I'm just curious, like how you think about it? Does it sound like it's in line at all, or does it sound familiar?
it does. I kind of always like to categorize things in very basic
Hmm.
terms and then sort them out through there. So
Oh,
I
okay.
always kind of look at like what you're saying, two ends of the spectrum. The extreme ends, they're both supporting the same thing, which is their sense of self, obviously, and
Hmm.
their fictitious reality. And then yours is a little more defined. I was thinking of it in terms of covert at one end and then overt at the other end.
Yes, yes.